on, let's get involved. Let's get behind that. Welcome to church. Welcome back to church. If you're coming back after some time away, it is good to be together today. And if you're just joining us right now, we are in a series, week 2 of a series called This is Living. And what we're doing is we're unpacking what it looks like from a scriptural point of view. In other words, in the pages of the Bible, like what does it mean to actually be human, and how do we play that out? Because all of us have some vision of what the good life is. I mean, what is the blessed life for you, right? You have a picture in your mind of what that might look like. I have one in my mind, and we're going to get into that. But before I do, I got to tell you a story from this week. We were, Amy and myself were down in Cape Town. We got to go down and be in a room with about 90 people who have it on their heart to plant a church in our nation in South Africa. And we got to do a couple of sessions with them and train and equip them with some of the things that we've learned, and just breathe courage into their stories. And we're excited about everything that God is wanting to do in them. But you know what inspired me most is just being in a room with people that believe the best about what God is wanting to do in and through people, and bring about transformation and life change, and just seeing them make radical decisions with their lives to give up certain things, say no to some things, to say yes to Jesus. And I'm not saying that all of you have to go and plant a church, but maybe, who knows, maybe God is going to speak to you. I mean, it is Pentecost Sunday after all. The 50 days after Easter, reflecting on the moment when the Holy Spirit fell upon people and transformed them and brought about this incredible change. Because honestly, that's the power of the gospel story, is it brings about change in our lives. I mean, who wants to follow someone that leaves us completely unchanged, right? I mean, maybe some of us. But the whole idea of the gospel is to bring about transformation, to change us more into people who reflect Jesus more and more for the sake of others. And we met this incredible couple down there at the church that was hosting the training, and they came out of a very, very conservative religious background and upbringing, where they'd learned a certain way of doing things, a certain way of believing in faith and all the things that went along with that, and very, very traditional. And along the way, they discovered a new way of doing things, and they found some freedom, and they got to donate all of the suits that they used to wear to church. Nothing wrong with wearing suits with their choice. They donated them, and they arrived in T-shirts and jeans and began to reshape the culture of the gathering, a Sunday gathering, and what it looked like. And needless to say, some people loved it, and other people moved on to other churches and those kind of things. But God is using this couple, and they're incredibly young. They're the same age as Amy and I, to bring about, I don't know what's funny about that. You guys are laughing too loudly. Anyway, to bring about change within all the connected churches to their story. And it's as if a seed has been planted, and now you cannot stop it. There's life coming and transformation coming. And man, I'd love to share more of the stories that we heard of people in that community that are finding Jesus and making radical decisions for them. And Jesus spoke about the kingdom of heaven being like a mustard seed that's planted and grows up to be this tree in the garden where the birds come, they find shelter in it. But Richard Rohr said this thing. He said, actually a better description of that, it's like a mustard weed that is planted. So the seed is planted, becomes a weed that goes through the garden, and you cannot get rid of it. And it just goes everywhere. And so in essence, the kingdom of heaven is like a virus that's released. You cannot stop it. No matter what you do, once it's started, you cannot stop it. And Jesus is always okay to operate from a minority position, to come and subvert culture and turn world systems on its head from the inside out. So this is the hope for our country, right? Is we don't need a majority. We don't need like Christianity to be the official religion of a country. We've seen how that went wrong in the Roman Empire. What we need is just the seeds of the kingdom of heaven to take root in our hearts and watch God come and subvert things and bring about change in people's lives. So we're encouraged, inspired about what's in people's hearts, and I'm trusting that God would impart something into your heart, that He would set your heart on fire in a greater way for His kingdom. And hey, maybe this is like too much for you, and this is your first moment in church, so let's dial it back a little bit and come back to this idea of what living is. So we asked some of you last week what your version of the blessed life is, and this is what you had to say. Check it out.
A life that is purpose-filled, a life where you are serving Jesus and where He's called you to serve, and a life where you are joyful.
Living in abundance and being loved
is living with confidence.
It's living for Jesus and following His way.
A Jesus-filled life, spending time in fellowship.
A church community to come home to on a Sunday.
Being with your friends.
Where you know what love is, you feel loved by community, friends.
Knowing that there's endless grace and endless peace.
To surround yourself with family like this, and a family indeed is a blessing.
To honestly be happy inside.
Where I'm fully aware of what Jesus thinks of me.
Having your parents around.
Living with God. It's tough sometimes, but you make it through.
Quality time with the people I care about.
For me, a blessed life is living one with family, community, and a healthy relationship with God.
You're content with how you're living, and you've got like a clear conscience.
Being around family, friends, having enjoyment.
Jesus.
I mean, so many good answers in there, right? I don't know what your version of the blessed life is, but when we were down in Cape Town this week, we happened to stay in the neighborhood in which we used to live. And the one morning I went out for a run, and I ran along the path that I used to take to work because we stayed close enough to work that I could walk there, didn't have to fight traffic or anything like that. And it's along this canal, and as the sun comes up, it shines on Table Mountain. You can see that, and the birds are flying. There's other people out like canoeing down the canal, and I was like, oh man, this is the good life. Like, why did we ever leave Cape Town and come here? And then I was kind of reminded of this because we came, if you don't know our story, we came from Cape Town where we lived. I transferred up here in corporate, and we were coming for 5 years. We were going to make a whole lot of money and then go back to the Cape and just live the good life. I mean, that was the plan. So now we're 14 years into the 5-year plan, and changed vocation, no longer an engineer, but now full-time on church staff, then planning a church, and here we are, a free church. And what I've realized, actually, this is the good life. This is the good life because for me, it's a life that has meaning and purpose and has to do with helping other people. And it's not just about me, but it's about what God is doing in me and through others and just reflecting on that. And so you never know what God is going to do when you say yes to Him, because we came into church barely. When we were living in Cape Town, we were kind of in the back row. Nothing against you guys in the back row over there, but we'd come in late and leave early, be completely anonymous, hope like anything. No one would ask us to go to a group or get involved or something, and here we are. Thank you. At least one, but the rest of you are like, oh my God, please go back to Cape Town. So what is your version of the good life? Maybe it's abundance, money, everything you've ever wanted. Maybe it's to live at the beach. Some people might like that, or to live in the bushveld or something. To be content, so you don't have to strive for anything. To have all your desires met, like whatever it is, just met. Is that your version of the good life? What is your version of the blessed life? What does it look like for you? Each of us have deep down some kind of idea or vision of what the good life is. All the problems solved, lack of anxiety, the absence of that, just peace, or whatever it is. Jesus has a version of the good life too. And it's contained in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, these 100 verses, which we commonly speak about as the Sermon on the Mount. And really what this is Jesus' vision. It's a new vision for a flourishing humanity. It's this idea that Jesus puts forward. And He said this, in His point of view, from His perspective, this is what it looks like to truly live. This is living in the words of Jesus. And I think it's worth paying attention to the words of Jesus, not because He has good ethical sayings and things that we can take and make into platitudes and life wisdom, and he has high moral values. All those things are good, but the reason why I think it's important to take seriously the things that Jesus said is because He said this about Himself, is I came to show you what the Father is like. And many of us often have a question, well, what is God really like? We can't see Him and imagine we have these pictures of what God is like. And Jesus said, this is why I came to earth, to show you what the Father is like. So if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And everything that I say, I speak not from my own accord, but because I've heard it from the Father. So in other words, the words of Jesus is kind of like, this is God speaking to you. And I think that's why it's worth paying attention to. And what you'll notice about Jesus, the more you read what He says, you'll find He does these three things. The first thing He does is He challenges conventional wisdom. In other words, the way that everyone is going and the way that the majority is moving, he challenges that and flips it on its head and presents a different way. In fact, in His words, He says this, conventional wisdom is like a wide road, and so many people are on it. But my way, it's like this narrow path, and there's a small gate that you got to find, and there's only few that find that. And it's completely different to what's conventional. It's completely different to the self-created reality that you have. So in every conversation, interaction with Jesus, he always challenges the reality and kind of the foundations that we've built upon. And he presents a different way. The second thing that he does is he gets right to the heart of the matter, and he challenges and identifies and points out the human condition, which generally, most of the time, in fact, all the time, has to do with our hearts. And he cuts to the chase, and he said, hey, this life is not about outward pretenses. It's not about how much you have and all those kind of things, but really what it is about the posture of your heart. And in every conversation, every moment that he has, what Jesus is doing is he's dealing with the heart. And by heart, I don't mean like your physical heart. I mean the essence of who you are, your mind, your will, emotions, your soul. This is what Jesus is getting at. And after he's identified that, like the human dilemma, he doesn't just leave us there hopeless, but what he always does is he presents the solution and shows the way to transformation. He shows the way, like this is the different way. And that's what it is. In the Sermon on the Mount, it's kind of Jesus' vision for what living really is, and it's completely different to conventional wisdom. It deals with the heart, and it shows us the way forward of how to really live. So this is why I think it's worth paying attention to, and I want to do that, but you have to make that decision for yourself. Is do you want to take seriously the words and teachings of Jesus and see his version of what living really is? Now, to do that, I have to ask you something. One of the things about a faith journey is as we go on the fringes of church and different churches and all these kind of things is we pick up things along the way and things that we've learned, and some of it comes from social media feeds and some of it comes from, a course that we did then or a preach that we listened to then or what we've read in scripture. And all of these things and the house that we grew up in and all these kind of things, they become like biases or lenses that we have on our view. So what we do is we pick up the scripture and we take all those biases and filters and what we know about scripture and we read the Bible with these lenses. Now the thing about these glasses is they are so big. I can't really see the frames, but you can definitely see that I have them on, right? So they become invisible to me. So as we dig into scripture, one of the most important things to do is to be aware that you have biases. And you have an understanding of what's in these pages. Even if you haven't been around church, you would have heard something like this. Don't judge, otherwise you'll be judged. And you have an interpretation of what that means. Or another one is, don't try to take the splinter out of someone else's eye before you've taken the plank or the log out of your own eye. I mean, you've heard that, right? Where does it come from? In the Sermon on the Mount, within those 100 verses. And there's a whole bunch more of them. So when we begin to unpack this, I have to ask you and encourage you to try as best as you can to remove your biases and to forget everything you know about this and begin again. Because one of the things that's true about following Jesus is the journey is about letting go and rediscovering. Every day, letting go of what you know, rediscovering the way of Jesus. We never become a master of this. We're always a student, an apprentice. Letting go, rediscovering. Are you ready? Here we go. If you have a Bible with you, we can go to Matthew chapter 5, and we'll read a couple of verses from starting at verse 1. In fact, before we get to verse 1, it says, if you're looking in your Bible with you, it says right at the top something like this, Sermon on the Mount, or Introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, or this is the Sermon on the Mount, something. So before I even read a verse, let me speak about this word sermon. So a couple of perhaps challenging things with this word sermon. To me, sounds boring. Like you're like, what? Can you say that in church? You're preaching a sermon? No, yeah, I'd rather use the word like maybe message or encouragement. I mean, I know what the essence is, but I think when we hear the word sermon, we kind of, many of us just like dull out, like, oh my goodness, I've heard so many sermons before. And here's the thing about sermons, is sermons are generally not memorable, right? But you know what's memorable? Songs. Songs are memorable. I mean, you've been to church before and you can't remember what the person said, what they spoke about, but what you do remember is the songs. And you remember the lyrics of the songs. So I want to reframe this for you, not as a Sermon on the Mount, but as a song on the Mount. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But first, interesting to know that the Sermon on the Mount has inspired much of what happens in music, or much of the music that you've listened to. The Joshua Tree album, U2, inspired by the Sermon on the Mount. Bob Marley has songs inspired by the Sermon on the Mount. Even Salty, the singing songbook. I don't know if any of you guys remember him, but he had a song, it went like this. Don't build your house on the sandy land. Don't build it too near the shore. Well, it might look kind of nice, but you'll have to build it twice, then you'll have to build your house once more. You will build your house upon the rock. Find a good foundation in a solid spot. And the storms may come and go, but the peace of God you will know. Anyone remember that song? Throwback, some of you like, oh my goodness, where have I arrived? So here's the thing, that's the song that I listened to growing up as a kid, and I can still remember it. Where does it come from? Out of the Sermon on the Mount, out of the Song on the Mount, chapter 7. It's the words of Jesus concluding, saying, if you hear these words and do them, then you are like a wise man who builds their life upon a rock, a firm foundation. But if you're not, then you're like the guy who builds his house upon the sandy land. You have to build it twice when the storms of life come. So this is a song. This is a song on a mountain. But it's not just a song in the sense of salty and all the things. And he wrote a lot of songs out of the Sermon on the Mount, which is brilliant. But actually, this is a song of the potential of humanity. So one of the ways that if you think of this as sermon, you think teaching, you think rules, you think obligation, you think all the things that you have to do. But this is a song. It's an expression of Jesus to show you're beautiful people. You're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. In other words, you're wondrous. You're created to be the light, so be the light. You're created as the ones to bring flavor to the world, so be that flavor. So he's describing, I can almost picture it, like he's singing, this is the potential of humanity. The idea of this sermon song, it's not to point out our faults and failures and our brokenness. I mean, we know that enough. It's not like we need Jesus to come and tell us like how bad we are, right? But what he's doing, he's elevating a vision and going, this is what living is. This is the potential that is inside of you. So this is a song that unleashes the potential of humanity. This is a picture of what God has for humanity. So I would even encourage you, like take a pen and cross out the word sermon and just write song in the top of your intro. If you're comfortable to do that, this is the Song on the Mount. It's a song because it's memorable. I want you to remember this. I want this song to get a hold of you and to call you into a greater story and the possibilities and the potential of what can be. And here's where the bias comes in. Some of you have read this, you've heard these verses, and you've heard them taught as things that you have to do and things that you have to, and you read it and you just feel a sense of guilt and shame because you go like, oh my goodness, I do not measure up to this. So think of this as a song that unleashes the potential of what God has created inside of you. This is what Jesus' version of living is. It's the song on the mount. The other thing about a sermon is most people don't remember it. It just goes in one ear and out the other. But what Jesus is getting at here, I want this to grab a hold of your life so you apply this so your life is built firm upon the rock. So when the storms come, you will stand strong. And let's be honest, if someone were to preach a sermon like this of 100 verses in one sitting, either the people that are listening to them, one or two things are going to happen. They're all going to fall asleep or their heads are going to explode. Because the stuff that Jesus has in here, it would take like years to unpack fully in a step because each word, each verse has so much potential locked up in it. So really what this is, you can think of this is the song of Jesus' greatest hits. So if you want to get a sense of what Jesus taught, what he was about, who he was, and all of that, you read through the Song on the Mountain and it gives you an idea of what Jesus' vision for your life is. That's what it is. We haven't even got to verse 1. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and he sat down, and his disciples came to him and he began to teach them. It's significant that this happens on a mountain. What Matthew is doing is he's portraying Jesus as a second Moses. And if you know this story in the Old Testament, this will be familiar to you, but the Israelite people were enslaved in the nation of Egypt. God raised up Moses to be their leader, to lead them out into the wilderness place. And then there was a mountain called Mount Sinai, and God met with Moses, and he gave the people the 10 commandments, or the 10 words, which is not rules, but it's a way of approaching God, how to live with God. And what's happening in this text that is Matthew is going like, this is like a second Moses. This is Jesus standing in the place of the first Moses, and he's going, I'm going to give to you the interpretation of what God's will is for your life. I'm going to give to you the vision of what living is. I mean, it happened in the Old Testament. The nation of Israel failed epically at it, and Jesus stands in the place of a better Moses, and he goes up the mountain with his disciples, and he begins to present the wisdom of what it looks like to live in the way that God had intended. And some people will say, well, and he sat down because rabbis sat down when they taught. Well, you might have heard that before. I think he just sat down because he just climbed the mountain. He was probably tired. There's nothing that says rabbis had to sit down when they taught. Rabbis would teach from anywhere. What I want you to notice is with him is the disciples. So don't have the idea that Jesus is preaching to thousands, these 100 verses. But this moment, He gathers a few, probably the 4 that he's called so far. And there's no names there, which means you can put your name in there. And they climbed the mountain to be at the feet of Jesus. They began to teach. And I want to say to you, the very fact that you showed up here today means that you've climbed a mountain. You've fought some battles. You've made some decisions to be here. So you're not part of the crowd that's out there. I mean, you might be looking into this story, but in essence, your actions of being here today kind of puts you in the place of these disciples, these apprentices that you're ready and waiting to hear from Jesus. You've climbed the mountain. The crowds might have been within earshot, but this teaching, this song is for the people who say, I want to follow Jesus. I want to be his apprentice. It's first and foremost for them. And it's helpful for other people to know, but what Jesus is getting at is the way this world is going to be transformed is if the people catch a hold of this vision and begin to live it out in their lives. The Beatitudes, next heading we read. People go, well, what does the Beatitudes mean? So the Beatitudes comes from a Latin word. What is it there? I don't speak Latin. Beatitudo. What happened in the 4th century, Roman Empire made Christianity the official religion, and they translated the Hebrew and Greek scriptures into Latin. And it was done by a guy called Jerome. So this word in Latin means happiness or fortunate. It doesn't mean beautiful. And you might have heard this before, and this is why I say it's helpful to try and take off the biases. These things we're about to read are the beautiful attitudes. It's not that. There's a primer in this heading, like this is what happiness is. This is what the good life is. This is what the fortunate life is. It's not beautiful attitudes to pursue. Like this is Jesus' picture of what the beautiful, or of the blessed life is. Are you ready? Do you want to find out what it is? Here we go. Jesus' version of the good life. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. Good life. Blessed life, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful. You're like, Jesus, wait. I thought this was the good life. I thought this was the fortunate life. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people insult you. I'm so encouraged by these 2 verses because I was reffing Ibuliki's rugby match yesterday with a whole lot of parents on the sideline. I was just remembering, blessed are you who are persecuted, blessed are you when people insult you. I was like, amen, me and Jesus on the field, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is Jesus' intro to what the good life, what the blessed life looks like. And it's a little different to what the conventional wisdom says the good life is. And perhaps a little different to what your view of the good life is. But we want to take seriously, understand the things that Jesus is talking about. So first of all, let's begin with this word blessed. What does Jesus mean when he says blessed? Behind the English word is a Greek word, makarioi. And this is the Greek word for blessed or fortunate or happy. The thing is, Jesus didn't speak Greek. He spoke Hebrew and Aramaic, a cousin language of that. So to have a better understanding of what this word actually means, we have to dig back into the Old Testament and see where is the word blessed in the Hebrew used that gets translated as makarioi. So there are 2 possible variations of the Hebrew, and I know this is getting a little bit deep, but it's super important, I think, for you to get a hold of this. And the first one is probably the more common understanding of the word blessed. The Hebrew word behind it is the one baruch, which means to speak a blessing or to give a blessing. And this is used in Genesis, in the creation story, Genesis 1, where it says, and God blessed Adam and Eve, and he told them to be fruitful and multiply. So it's something of a spoken blessing. It's God's provision. It's giving something. God blessed them. This is the bless that you use when you say to someone, I bless you, or they sneeze and you say, bless you. It's like goodwill and favor and blessing towards you, and it's the most common occurrence of when we use blessing. But there's another Hebrew word that's used as blessed, and this is the one that gets translated into the Greek as makarioi, so it's probably more likely that Jesus used this one. And in Psalm, I think it's Psalm 84, verse 5, it says, blessed are those whose strength is in you. In other words, this word blessing is something of a perspective rather than a proclamation. So Baruch is like a proclamation, I bless you, but this word, which is ashrei, the Hebrew word, it's more of a perspective. It's because of some deeper truth, that person is blessed. In other words, if you think of your picture of the good life and you see someone living in that and you look at them from your perspective, you say, that person is blessed. You're not speaking a blessing upon them, but because of the state that they are in, from your perspective, you're saying that person has the good life. That person is blessed. So it's kind of this subjective view of what blessing or what the good life is. And it's important to make this differentiation because as we read through these Beatitudes, and there are 9 of them, we're just going to do the first one today and then we'll unpack the others as we go. It's important to understand this because if we see that Jesus is speaking that this is a blessing, you can read the next line which says, blessed are those who mourn, as if God is putting something into your life which puts you into a place of mourning and grief, and you're supposed to receive that as a blessing from God. Like, does it make sense? Like, blessed are you who mourn. It's kind of this idea, like, is God sadistic that he puts me into a place of mourning and that's somehow a blessing? But it's more from Jesus' point of view. He's saying people who are in this state of poor in spirit, we'll get to that next. He's saying people who are in this state of being poor in spirit, that's the good life. So it's from Jesus' perspective. So all of these things, they are perspectives, they're not proclamations. So sometimes we can read this and we say, well, blessed are those who mourn, and blessed as if it's a proclamation, but it's a perspective that's held, an observation. People who are in this state, they are blessed. This is the good life. This is the blessed life from Jesus' perspective. So on the one hand, we hold this intention that these are perspectives and they're not proclamations. And also, as we go through this whole song on the mountain that speaks of unleashing this new vision of humanity, all of these things, they are descriptions of what it looks like to live a kingdom life. They are not prescriptions. And there's a difference because you can read through this text and feel like you have to live up to this model that Jesus is putting out there so that you can inherit the kingdom of heaven or go to heaven one day. That's not what Jesus is saying. What he's doing is he's saying these are markers. When you see these things in people's life, you go, that person's got it. That person's got one foot in the kingdom of heaven. That person understands what I'm talking about. These are markers, descriptions of what it looks like to live within the kingdom of heaven. It's descriptions or markers or the fruit of what a kingdom lifestyle looks like. Remember, Jesus painting this picture. This is what living is. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Ashrei are the poor in spirit. From my perspective, the people that are poor in spirit, they're living the good life. So how we interpret the poor in spirit has a lot to do with it because you have an idea of what poor in spirit is, right? So like, what is poor in spirit? Does it mean we must be like depressed? Does it mean like, what does poor in spirit mean? So again, to do a little bit of linking back to what's in the Old Testament, there's a word there that's used for poor. It's the word ani, and it's used in a context like this. In Isaiah 66 verse 2, my favor is upon those who are humble. That's the word, ani, humble. So this, you could say it like this. The good life, the blessed life, is for those who are humble. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You can tension that with this word for powerless. Jesus is speaking to a people, his disciples, who are in the context of a Roman occupation in their country. They want change, they want to see change, but collectively and together they don't have the means or the energy or the power to be able to bring about systemic change within their country, in and of their own accord. So it's twofold. It's this idea of being powerless, but also being aware that you're powerless to change things. So that pushes you to a place of dependence, not on yourself, but on of God. So you could say it like this, and we're going to paraphrase a lot. The good life, the blessed life, is for those who realize that they are powerless to do anything to change things. Because they've been set free from believing the lie that they can change things in their own power or by controlling things. The blessed life, the good life, is for the poor in spirit. That's people who have been freed from the lie that the more control that they have over their life or the more power that they have in life is going to bring about their satisfaction. Actually, the poor in spirit is the realization that having more power, having more control is not going to bring about change. But actually, it's in this place of surrender and humility. It's in the place of powerlessness where there's dependence not on me, not on my efforts and my striving and my achievements, but a complete dependence on God. And somehow we relate to that in our nation. Collectively, we go, we don't have the power to bring about systemic change in our country. But if we can be humble enough to acknowledge that we can't do it in our own strength, it's like Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20, where the army's there coming to invade the people of Judah, and they cry out and they say, God, we don't know what to do, but we look to you. That's the good life. That's a good life. You're free from this lie of common narrative that says control and power is the way to feel fulfilled and to satisfy and to make a difference. But it's a place of powerlessness and dependence on God. It's a place of humility, recognizing that even though you may be in a privileged position, that privileged position doesn't come from you. It comes from God. That your bank balance and your house and everything you have, it's not because of you, but it's because of God who has given you abilities and put favor upon you. It's that humility. It's a humility to recognize that you can't be a lone ranger and that you need people in your life. To be humble enough to have people speaking into your life. What Jesus is saying is the good life, the blessed life, is for people who are humble enough to realize that this life is not just about them, that they need others in their life and are humble enough to do it. And the good life is for those who are humble enough to recognize because everything comes from God, there's a responsibility to use what's been given by God for the benefit of others. That's what the good life is. And then Jesus goes on and he says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Present tense. He doesn't say, hey, well, blessed are those who walk around depressed all day and just like trying to act sad so that they can go to heaven one day. Because let's be honest, you can read it like that at face value. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the depressed, for they'll go to heaven. That's not what Jesus says. He says, hey, the good life is for those who've got a hold of this truth, that in and of your own strength, you're powerless, because now you're ready to receive what the message of the kingdom of heaven is. It's something that's planted and grows and subverts world systems and brings change from the inside out. And systemic change will come because Jesus is taking the world somewhere. And we get to be part of this story, accepting his invitation. But it's not going to happen by our strength. It's not going to happen by our striving, but it's going to happen. This is the way it's going to happen. Is praying that prayer. Is Jesus, your kingdom coming, your will be done. And use us in that place. And when Jesus sees that, he says, that's a good life. You've got it. You've got it. There's a transcendent truth that you've got. That's a good life. And yours is the kingdom of heaven. Meaning that the kingdom of heaven is not somewhere abstract out there above the clouds where we go one day when we die. Yours is the kingdom of heaven. It means you step into that here and now. So when you take a hold of these truths, it's like you have one foot in the kingdom of heaven, one foot on this earth, and you're holding both in tension. So you're in this kingdom of heaven, but you're also not of this world. And the two go together. And the kingdom of heaven is not a geographical place, but it's the place where the rule and reign of God is done in a person's heart. Where there's an adherence and obedience, a surrender to the humility. I'm powerless. Jesus, your will be done in my heart. That is the kingdom of heaven. And this is what Jesus says the good life is. Free from striving, free from expectation that you have to do something to receive some kind of pronounced blessing by God. But recognizing that there's an invitation for you to step deeper into the kingdom, to take on the ways of Jesus, to allow his truth to transform and reshape and flip your understanding of everything, to step off the wide road of conventional wisdom and reality and find a narrow path, which is tough and easy, but in every step there's growth and there's blessing and there's purpose and there's value and there's identity. It's to do that and take a hold of this. And when Jesus sees this, he's going, that's the good life. That's the blessed life. That's the blessed life because you're free from everything else, all these false narratives. And this is the heart of what Jesus is getting at. So I don't know what that looks like for you. I mean, a couple of thoughts. It can be, there's a realization in you like, hey, I've been living my life for power and control, building on the sandy land perhaps. You know what I love about church community? Is seeing people who are poor in spirit. And I hope that image, whatever the image that you had of poor in spirit was, has somehow flipped and changed. Seeing people who recognize their powerless but complete dependence on God, and yet are like influential beyond belief. There's people that sit in the seats next to you, and maybe some of you that are CEOs and managing directors of big companies in our city. And they come poor in spirit. Worship together, and put out chairs, and clean the bathrooms, and make coffee. Don't look for any recognition. Give all glory to God. Like, how did you get to be where you are in such a place of influence? Say, well, hey, it's not me. This is what God has put me into this place. He's installed me here. He's given. He's done this. So therefore, in turn, I know that I'm in this position. There's a responsibility in me to help others and to serve. It's poor in spirit. It's poor in spirit. That's the good life, where there's a humility. The good life is for those who've got a sense that they're free from a spirit of pride. The blessed life is those who've got a handle of this thing of, I don't need the recognition. I don't need the accolades. I don't need to worry about what people think of me. There's a humility, but not just a apathy, a doing something, a serving. When Jesus sees that, he says, that's living. That's living. That's what the kingdom is about. That's his vision for humanity, is people who are not prideful, people who are not seeking power and control, but people who love to serve, love others, love God. And that's the vision, and that's the beauty of this community. Maybe today's a day where you make a decision like, hey, it's time to rebuild my life. Maybe you've been building on the sandy land, to put it in the words of Salty, paraphrased of Jesus. And you realize the storms of life will come, they've knocked everything flat, and you're wondering, you're grappling with, how do I begin to rebuild? And this is Jesus' vision. This is like the blueprint for life. I was taking a run the other day on a long hill in midstream, some of you know it. And as I was running along, I saw this crane. And on the side of the crane, I've never seen it before, never noticed it before. I didn't even know this company existed. Forgive my ignorance. Makarioi. And as I saw it, I was like, hey, I know what that means. That's a Greek word. That's a Greek word for blessing. So my brain went, but I thought, I got to take a picture of it. Because sometimes this is how God speaks to me, is you notice random things. Why did I notice that? So I took this picture up, and then last night I thought, I must just share this tomorrow. So in the first service, I shared this picture. I put it up on screen like this, and we closed the meeting off, and a guy came up in tears, and he said, this company has been, he saw that, and he just began crying, because they've been like for 3 years trying to get him to come to work there, and he's at a decision point in his life, and he just felt like God was speaking to him in that moment. And how is it that God uses like an ignorant runner like me to see something out there, take a picture, put it on a screen, someone comes for their first time in church, sees that, same company, and it's like God connects the dots. Now, this is the kingdom of heaven. We can't control it, we can't understand it, we just get to be a part of it. And this is the word that I shared. I said, I saw this picture and this is what I felt. This feels like a word from God saying, I'm going to help you rebuild with blessing. It's a crane construction site. You've been building in all the wrong places, on all the wrong foundations. And this is an invitation from God to you to say, I want to help you rebuild your life on a firm foundation. Makario, blessing upon your life. We're going to do it not your way, but in the ways of Jesus. And I don't know what that means for you, but maybe that's a word for some of you. That today God is speaking like you spoke to that gentleman in the first service. Maybe he's got a word for you and saying, it's time to rebuild. But now we're going to rebuild in the way of Jesus. And it's going to take you to recognize your powerlessness and your total dependence on God, dependence on people around you, and the responsibility that you have to use the things that you have in your life to help other people to find Jesus.